Imagine waking up to find the sky has turned red. The sun barely breaks through thick haze. Summer temperatures drop to near freezing. Your crops wither in the fields. Within months, 1/3 of the population in your region dies from starvation. This isn't a distant apocalyptic future. It's what actually happened in 1815 after Mount Tambora erupted, creating the year without a summer. And it's just one of many climate catastrophes that fundamentally altered the course of human civilization. Today, we're examining how vulnerable we've always been to the forces of nature. Throughout human history, we've fought wars, built empires, and toppled kingdoms. We've credited great leaders, revolutionary ideas, and technological breakthroughs for shaping civilization. But there's another force that's influenced humanity more than any general or philosopher: climate. Not gradual change over millennia, but sudden, catastrophic shifts that happened within human lifetimes. Events so dramatic they rewrote the story of entire continents. Today, we're exploring the climate catastrophes you've never heard of that changed everything. Let's start 12,800 years ago. Humans had survived the last ice age and Earth was warming. Glaciers were retreating. Forests were expanding. Then suddenly, everything reversed. Within a single human generation, temperatures in the northern hemisphere plummeted by up to 15 degrees Celsius. Ice sheets that had been melting surged forward again. This event is called the Younger Dryas, and it lasted roughly 1,300 years. The impact was catastrophic. Across North America, Europe, and Asia, megafauna that had survived for thousands of years went extinct. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and dozens of other species disappeared. Archaeological evidence shows that human populations crashed. Settlement patterns changed dramatically. People who had been transitioning to agriculture were forced back into nomadic hunting. What caused it? The leading theory involves meltwater from retreating glaciers. Enormous lakes of fresh water had formed at the edge of ice sheets. When these lakes suddenly drained into the North Atlantic, they disrupted the ocean's thermohaline circulation. This is the conveyor belt of currents that distributes heat around the planet. Cut off that circulation, and you essentially turn off Europe's heating system. Recent evidence also suggests a comet or asteroid impact may have triggered the event, though this remains debated. Either way, the result was clear: a climate catastrophe that fundamentally reshaped which species survived and how humans organized themselves. Some researchers even argue that the Younger Dryas forced the development of agriculture. When wild food became scarce, humans had no choice but to cultivate crops. Civilization itself might be a response to climate trauma. Fast forward to about 6,200 BCE. Humans had successfully transitioned to agriculture in several regions. In the Fertile Crescent, communities were growing wheat and barley. Then, another massive climate shift struck. The 8.2 kilo-year event was caused by the final collapse of the Laurentide ice sheet in North America. An enormous freshwater lake called Lake Agassiz, larger than all the Great Lakes combined, catastrophically drained into the Atlantic. The result? Global temperatures dropped by 2 to 6 degrees Celsius. Droughts spread across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Asia. The monsoon patterns that fed early agricultural societies weakened dramatically. Archaeological evidence shows widespread abandonment of settlements. In the Fertile Crescent, many farming communities simply disappeared from the record. Population genetics suggest a significant bottleneck during this period. Some groups migrated to river valleys where water remained available. Others returned to hunting and gathering. This event lasted about 400 years. When it finally ended and the climate stabilized, something interesting happened. The societies that survived became more organized, more hierarchical, and more technologically sophisticated. They developed irrigation systems, centralized food storage, and social structures to manage scarcity. The 8.2 kilo-year event essentially forced humans to innovate or die. Many died. But those who survived laid the groundwork for the first true civilizations. Now let's jump to 536 CE. This year is often called the worst year to be alive in human history, and for good reason. In early 536, a mysterious fog darkened the skies over Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Historical records describe it consistently. The sun gave off light without warmth, like the moon. Temperatures plummeted. Snow fell in August in China. Crops failed everywhere. Modern science has identified the cause. A massive volcanic eruption, likely in Iceland or the tropics, ejected enormous amounts of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. This created a volcanic winter. Sunlight was blocked by aerosol particles. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped by 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like much, but was devastating for agriculture. The consequences rippled across the globe. In Ireland, tree ring data shows this was the coldest decade in 1,500 years. Bread prices in Europe skyrocketed. Famine spread. Then, weakened by malnutrition, populations became vulnerable to disease. In 541 CE, just 5 years after the initial climate event, the plague of Justinian struck the Byzantine Empire. This plague killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people, roughly half the population of Europe at the time. The Byzantine Empire, which had been on the verge of reclaiming the old Roman territories, collapsed into chaos. The classical world effectively ended. The Dark Ages began not just because of barbarian invasions or political collapse, but because climate created conditions for catastrophe. In Mesoamerica, the city of Teotihuacan, one of the largest cities in the world at the time, went into decline. In China, the Northern Wei dynasty fragmented. Across the world, 536 CE and its aftermath reshaped political boundaries and social structures in ways that echoed for centuries. Climate doesn't just destroy. Sometimes it enables. Between roughly 950 and 1250 CE, the Northern Hemisphere experienced a warming period. Temperatures rose by about 1 degree Celsius. In Europe, this had dramatic effects. Farmland expanded northward. Crop yields increased. Populations grew. Wine grapes flourished in England. This medieval warm period enabled the Viking expansion. The Norse could sail farther, settle Iceland and Greenland, and even reach North America. Greenland actually had patches of grazing land, which is how it got its misleadingly optimistic name. Archaeological evidence shows Norse farmers raising cattle and sheep on land that's now permanently frozen. In Europe, the agricultural surplus funded cathedral construction, university founding, and the beginning of what we call the High Middle Ages. Trade routes expanded. Cities grew. This was a time of relative prosperity, and it was made possible largely by climate. But warming also had negative effects. In Central America, the classic Maya civilization collapsed during this same period. While the reasons are complex, climate played a major role. Increased temperatures brought severe droughts to the Yucatan Peninsula. The sophisticated water management systems the Maya had built couldn't cope. Cities were abandoned. Population crashed. Climate gave with one hand and took with the other. Then the warmth ended. Beginning around 1300 CE and lasting until about 1850, Earth entered what's called the Little Ice Age. Temperatures dropped by about 1 degree Celsius on average, with some regions seeing larger swings. This might not sound like much, but the effects were profound. In Europe, the Thames River in London froze regularly. Frost fairs were held on the ice. Alpine glaciers advanced, consuming villages. Growing seasons shortened. Crop failures became frequent. Between 1315 and 1317, the Great Famine killed millions across northern Europe. Social structures crumbled. The feudal system, already under stress, began to break down. Desperate populations looked for scapegoats. The witch trial hysteria that swept Europe from the 15th to 17th centuries correlates strongly with periods of harvest failure and cold snaps. When crops failed and children died, communities blamed witches for spoiling the weather. The Little Ice Age also contributed to political upheaval. The French Revolution in 1789 was preceded by a series of catastrophic harvests. Bread prices in Paris tripled. Starving populations don't quietly accept the status quo. Climate stress creates political instability. In China, the Ming dynasty collapsed in the mid-1600s, partly due to agricultural failures brought on by cooling temperatures and altered monsoon patterns. In North America, colonies faced harsh conditions. The Jamestown settlement in Virginia nearly failed due to a severe drought during the coldest part of the Little Ice Age. The most dramatic example of climate reshaping history in the modern era occurred in 1815. Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted with a force equivalent to roughly 800 megatons of TNT, making it the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. The explosion was heard 1,200 miles away. The ash cloud reached the stratosphere. The following year, 1816, became known as the Year Without a Summer. In New England, snow fell in June. Frost killed crops in July and August. In Europe, similar conditions prevailed. Food prices skyrocketed. Famine spread across the northern hemisphere. In Switzerland, the situation was so dire that the government declared a national emergency. The social consequences were far-reaching. In China, the Yunnan province experienced catastrophic floods, followed by crop failures, leading to famine and epidemic disease. Global rice prices doubled. The resulting food insecurity contributed to political instability and migration. But there were unexpected outcomes, too. Mary Shelley, stranded indoors by the dreary weather during a Swiss vacation, wrote Frankenstein. The painting style of J.M.W. Turner was influenced by the dramatically colorful sunsets caused by volcanic aerosols in the atmosphere. Crop failures in New England accelerated Western migration in the United States. This single volcanic eruption, through its climate effects, influenced literature, art, politics, and migration patterns across the entire globe. It demonstrated just how interconnected our world had become, and how vulnerable even industrial societies were to climate disruption. How do we know all this? The science is remarkable. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica contain trapped air bubbles and chemical signatures that reveal past atmospheric conditions. Tree rings show growth patterns affected by temperature and rainfall. Lake sediments preserve pollen records showing which plants grew when. Stalagmites in caves record isotopic data about ancient precipitation. These paleoclimate records give us a detailed picture of Earth's climate history. And what they show is clear. Throughout human history, rapid climate changes have been major drivers of social transformation. Civilizations rise during favorable climate periods. They collapse or transform during unfavorable ones. This has direct relevance today. The climate changes we're experiencing now are happening faster than most historical examples. We're conducting a massive, uncontrolled experiment on Earth's climate system. The difference is that historical climate events were natural. Current changes are primarily driven by human activity. But here's the important context. Humans have survived climate catastrophes before. We've adapted, migrated, and innovated. The question isn't whether we can survive climate change, it's what kind of civilization will emerge on the other side, and how much suffering occurs in between. Climate has always been a primary force in human history. It's triggered extinctions, collapsed civilizations, and reshaped entire continents. But it's also driven innovation, forced adaptation, and demonstrated human resilience. Understanding these past events doesn't just satisfy historical curiosity. It provides crucial context for the challenges we face today. Climate can change rapidly. Societies can be fragile. But humans are also remarkably adaptable when given sufficient warning and resources to respond. The climate catastrophes of the past happened without warning and without the scientific understanding to predict or mitigate them. We don't have that excuse today. The real question is, whether we'll learn from history or be condemned to repeat it. What do you think? Are there other historical climate events that deserve attention? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this exploration valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. Thanks for watching.